if you can, take yourself back to the beginning of this year. We had just finished 2019, which, let's be honest, was a tough year. Wildfires raged in the Amazon rainforest, Australia, and Los Angeles. Mass shootings were out of control around the world. 51 people were murdered in the Christchurch mosque shooting in New Zealand, 23 dead at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas. There were protests in Hong Kong, the Mueller report, Brexit, Jeffrey Epstein, the Turkish invasion of Syria, the Trump impeachment inquiry. I can seriously go on all day, but you get the point. It was a crappy year, and it felt good to put it in the rearview mirror. It's not that we had super high hopes for 2020, but it could be better. It's not like we'd have to deal with a global pandemic, right? One person who planned on having an amazing 2020 was Will Carroll, drummer for Bay Area thrash metal veterans Death Angel. Death Angel had just been nominated for a Grammy Award for the first time in the band's 38-year history, and they had a European tour scheduled for the spring. Here's Will thinking back to early 2020.
We had a new album out, Humanicide, and it was getting positive reviews and good press. And then when we got the nomination for the Grammy, that was just a whole new level of positive energy. We didn't see that coming, and if it floored us, like we were shocked to even be considered. And that whole experience was like a whirlwind of more press, and press we wouldn't normally get. Like local TV stations were covering Death Angel all of a sudden. So yeah, going to the Grammys was a fun experience. I felt a little bit out of my element because we were the only metalheads there really, but it was still a great experience and a lot of fun. And it was just something we're not used to, like having that much attention outside of, the metal world. And so it was great. And then we went on the Bass Strikes Back tour of Europe with Exodus and Testament. And that tour was going amazingly. Like every show or almost every show was sold out. We were playing really big venues, and, and then the show in Italy got canceled in Milan. And that was kind of an eye opener for COVID-19, how serious it really was. And the last show of the tour got canceled too, because in Germany, they shut down and said they can't have a big group of people getting together. And so our show got canceled, and everyone knew how serious it was, and yeah, things started to plummet from there.
We'll get back to Will in a minute, but as he dealt with the prospect of being more than 5,000 miles from home while the coronavirus crisis was flaring up all over Europe, another drummer here in the States was going through the paces of his normal life.
My name is Lou Santiago Jr. In 2001, I was a Guitar Center national finalist. In 2003, I won the Modern Drummer Undiscovered Drummer contest in the over 18 category. Went on to tour with Maynard Ferguson, Jeff Dio, Natalie Grant, Anthony Evans, Marco Barrientos, Christine DiClario, Raul Sanchez, 7 Day Slumber, and all these experiences led me to what I do now, which I still play drums professionally, but I also practice emergency medicine as a board-certified physician assistant.
That's right, Lou works in the emergency room at the epicenter of the COVID-19 outbreak in the U.S.
Right now, I currently work at Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn, New York.
During one of his shifts in March, Lou got a preview of what the next month of his life was going to look like.
So it was overnight shift, and I look at the patient list, like who's my next patient coming up and whatever, and I see the name, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. That's the same name as such and such, who's one of the nurses. And then it turns out it is him, and I was just like, what's going on? He's like, man, I'm not feeling good. My body aches. I feel tired. I feel like I have a fever. I have a headache. I'm a little nauseous. So I'm just talking to him. I'm like, man, it sounds like you have the flu. He goes, yeah, I think I have the flu, honestly. And I was like, it's all good. We'll do a flu swab. Took some blood, all that stuff and everything that we would do. And I gave him, hydrated him with IV. And that was it. And then I went back to my station, let him rest. And I was like, man, let me just swab him for COVID just to be safe, So we swabbed him. It was getting close to the end of the shift. He looked 100 times better. So to me, it was clear cut looking like the flu, seeing how he bounced back and was ready to go home and all that stuff. And I noticed I wasn't seeing him on the shifts. And I was like, where's homeboy at, And then I bump into him 2 weeks later. And he's like, man, thank you for everything. Thanks for taking care of me. I'm doing better. And I'm like, you've been gone this whole time? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, bro, how bad was that flu? And he's like, dude, I didn't have the flu. I had COVID-19.
Lou absolutely could have been forgiven for not testing his coworker for COVID-19 because at that point in the year, even though we were all well aware of the outbreak in China, it still wasn't totally on our radar as something to worry about here in the US.
It was still flu season when that was happening. Like I was still diagnosing patients with the flu as well. So he comes in and then I just said, well, let's just do COVID, just to be safe. And then after that, I find out, 10 of my coworkers tested COVID positive. And 2 perished.
That's right. 2 of the healthcare workers Lou worked alongside day in and day out are no longer with us. As of the end of May, over 200,000 people have tested positive for coronavirus in New York City, and more than 16,000 New York City residents have died. As Lou talks about his life earlier this year, you can hear the stress and the pain in his voice.
The ER back then was, man, I guess incomprehensible would be the term, because what ended up happening is that there was just a huge influx of patients, respiratory problems, It wasn't a matter of like, man, I wonder if this patient has coronavirus. It was a matter of, we already know we are jumping into a coronavirus cesspool, So the only thing we need to make sure is that we can cover ourselves, as best as we can. So seeing that and coming in, just over and over and over and over again, and all the ventilators are already used up. So this patient that just came in is needing a ventilator, but you don't have one. And normally the intubations take place in the critical care area, the trauma bay area and all stuff. We're talking about intubating patients in the hallway at this point because there's no more space. There's no beds, there's no nothing. So seeing someone intubated in the acute ER area, which is not typically a place that anyone is intubated, that was definitely like for us, like, oh crap, this is no joke. The ER is like a battleground.
Throughout this pandemic, you've probably seen t-shirts and face masks that say something like, support healthcare workers. You know that in the early days of the pandemic, they lacked N95 respirator masks, isolation gowns, and other personal protective equipment. This put them at greater risk of infection, but throughout my conversation with Lou, he kept making the point that coronavirus is not the most dangerous pandemic that healthcare workers and the rest of us are facing.
Yes, there's something out there. Yes, there is a virus. Yes, it's causing, and it has caused, detriment to people's lives. But unfortunately, the true pandemic that I believe is going to be coming soon is mental health, with all the fear and the stress and the anxiety and everything that's been set, and the overwork that's been put on the healthcare professionals with, with whatever resources we had. And then on top of that, the stresses of feeling that you were inadequate for those who you felt could have benefited versus those who you knew, no matter what you did, it wasn't going to be a good outcome. Just seeing all this stuff, like the helplessness, that affects the healthcare worker.
It's obvious that Lou carried those feelings with him every day.
It's disheartening. It was defeating, in a way, because, I signed up for this to make a difference in someone's life, for the better, to just do what I can to help expand a life cycle, however I can, you know what I mean? Just someone's life and improve someone's quality of life health-wise, So to feel that your hands are tied behind your back because the methods in which to take care of this person can't be provided because it's already used up. There were times that I felt I just went home just saying I lost today. That really was something where really had us feeling like we're losing because there's so many people that need to be taken care of.
Now that the worst of the outbreak is hopefully in the past, Lou's ER has pretty much gotten back to normal.
So that was the reality for about 3 weeks. I would say like 3 hot, weeks. And then you started seeing it taper down. So you go from that to now in the last 4 days, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday there was a patient who got swabbed for COVID. I think the test came back negative. So then if that's the case, if it's true, that would make 4 days with no COVID cases in our ER.
Back to Will Carroll. To review, while COVID-19 is migrating from China to Europe, Will and his Death Angel bandmates are touring around Europe in a bus. And if you've ever toured with a band in a bus, you know exactly how close those quarters are.
In the bunk area of the bus, the hallway where all the bunks are, it's enclosed on either end, and it's just like a germ incubator. Germs just pass from one bunk to the other. When a couple of other members started feeling ill by the last week and a half of the tour, it was a little, get kind of scary, and there's not much you can do to avoid it because, you're sleeping so close to these people and you're on stage with them. And these guys are my friends, and if they're feeling under the weather, I don't want to turn my back on them, so I was hanging out with them on the bus and talking, and I wasn't really keeping my distance too far, or anything like that. And also I was pretty confident in my immune system because I never get sick. So, I treated things as normal as I do normally, which is probably a mistake.
But as the tour wound down, Will started feeling under the weather himself.
I was feeling weak and just, not myself, not 100%. I stopped drinking and I stopped doing after show partying and hanging out with everybody backstage. Those last couple of days, I was just going straight back to the bus and going to my bunk and just sleeping as much as I could. It was in the back of my mind that, everyone was being paranoid about the virus, but it didn't really strike me until the flight home when I just started breaking out in a horrible fever and just had the sweats and just felt like just terrible. And then I started thinking, wow, I might have it, Then I just stayed in my seat and didn't walk around or interact with anybody else. And I same with at the airport and the days following, like when I got home, I quarantined myself for 5 days.
So, Will just endured a transatlantic flight while coronavirus was taking over his body. He finally made it back to San Francisco where his fiancée, LeSean, was waiting for him. It was obvious right away that Will was not in good shape.
She took one look at me and was like, oh, you don't look so good and you need to go to bed. And I went to bed immediately. And to be quite honest, those days are very hazy. I don't remember much because I was, I guess, kind of delirious with fever, just staring at the wall for long periods of time and kind of in like a meditation type of trance, which isn't me. I'm not really a guy who meditates and gets into trances like that.
But it was Will's breathing while he slept that really alarmed his fiancée.
Yeah, I couldn't breathe, apparently. Like, she said I was just struggling to stay alive, it seemed like, when I was sleeping, And I'm a heavy snorer, so sometimes I stop breathing in my sleep because of my snoring, but this was way beyond, apparently.
And then that struggle to breathe carried over into Will's daytime hours.
When I was struggling to breathe when I was awake, that was at the point where my fiance was like, yeah, this is beyond anything her and I could take care of, So she had me sent to the hospital and they brought me into the emergency room immediately, apparently, and got to work on me. And I went into that coma pretty quick.
When Will arrived at the hospital, he had a fever of 102.6 degrees, and several liters of fluid had filled his lungs. His doctors determined that he needed to be put on a ventilator, and he was quickly placed into a medically induced coma. Will stayed in that coma for 12 days. He was proned 18 hours a day, which means turned face down, in an attempt to save his life. A few days in, his heart failed because the medication he was taking to keep him on the ventilator was so taxing on his body. One of the cruelest things about COVID-19 is that patients suffer alone. Friends and family are not allowed to visit in the hospital because of fears the virus could be passed on. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world have died alone, even though they had family who wanted to take care of them. They wanted to be there for their final breath. That was the scenario that Lishan was facing with Will.
It was a horrifying experience for my fiance, Lishan, especially. She couldn't visit me. No one could visit me, no friends or family. So she had to just resort to calling the hospital every couple of hours just to get checkups or to get an update. And they were using words like grim and grave and just saying it's not looking good. This is not a good situation. So I can only imagine what was going through her head.
Interestingly, we know what was going through Will's head while he was in that coma. While his body was clinging to life, his mind was somewhere far away. You may have read about this part of Will's story, as he's talked about it in a few other interviews.
Yeah, the dreams I had, or people are calling them visions, I call it a vision because it was so vivid and so real, and it's so burned in my brain. Like, I remember every detail of it. I felt myself leaving my body and in a ethereal state, if you will, and just a floating sensation. And I shot down to hell, or what appeared to be hell. It was a dark place, and there was people moaning in agony off in the distance. And I saw a being that looked like a female version of Satan. Like, it was very horrific looking, with glowing eyes and spiked teeth and horns. And she was laughing at me, and she was sitting in a rock kind of throne. And it was just very unpleasant, and I just didn't want to be anywhere near her. I wanted to get away from her, as far away from her as possible. But I couldn't move because I was this huge blob of a creature, like all the articles are saying right now, like Jabba the Hutt. Like I did say that in the initial interview. Actually, to be more specific, I looked like the creature at the end of Weird Science when Chet gets turned into that big blob creature. It was kind of like that. And I was being punished for the sin of sloth, which was kind of appropriate because before this happened, I was a pretty lazy guy. That's not the case anymore, but I was pretty lazy, and people would always get on my case about being more active, and I'd always use the drums as an excuse. Like, man, I sweat my ass off an hour and a half every night behind the drums, or I practice 3 or 4 nights a week playing the drums. So I would use that as an excuse, but that's clearly not enough to stay healthy. So yeah, I was being punished for sloth. I was this morbid, obese creature, and I was vomiting blood. Like, after every 5 seconds, I'd vomit. A whole mouthful of blood would come out. And I vomited until I had a heart attack and died. And that's kind of ironic because I had heart failure during my coma. And then I shot up to heaven after that. And I totally felt myself being like elated and just like a lofty feeling, like whimsical, if you will. But it felt great. It was a great feeling until I got there. And heaven was kind of a scary place too. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be back with my friends and people I love. Heaven was like a giant Roman orgy kind of. And the angels were vicious. They were mean, and they were about as scary or even scarier than the demons were. But the angels were scary, and I didn't want to be there. And next thing I know, I shot back down to Earth, and I was in a nightclub with my friends. And for some reason, the nightclub was in like Modesto or Stockton or somewhere like that, like somewhere in the middle of nowhere, California. And I was even thinking, like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, this sucks. And then I woke up, and I was in my hospital bed, and I had machines all around me, and devices hooked up to me, and tubes coming in and out of me. And I turned to the nurse who was right there, and I asked her point blank, "Am I still in hell?" and she didn't answer me, and she walked away. I had no idea what city I was in or what country I was in. I had no idea where I was, and I was really scared, because I thought for a second maybe I was still in Europe, and I was in a hospital in Europe, and I didn't want to be in that situation. So they wouldn't tell me anything for a while. Like maybe until the second day I was awake, they finally started peppering details and information to me here or there. I guess they didn't want to overwhelm me with all the information. Like I was in a coma for 12 days, but they didn't tell me that until much later. They just started asking me questions like, do I know what year it is? Do I know who the president is? And I was like, well, I don't know. Last time I was coherent, it was Trump, but maybe things have changed. I don't know how long I've been gone, and I know people are really fighting to get him out of office. So they're like, yeah, he's still the president. And then they finally asked, do you know where you are, what city you're in? I said, no, I have no idea. They said, you're in San Francisco. I was like, oh, I had a sigh of relief, and I felt so much better. And then they told me what hospital I was in, and I was like, holy shit, that's like 5 blocks away from my apartment. So that was a major relief. And then when they told me, you've been in a coma for 12 days, I was like, oh my God. Like I was so confused and just like bewildered. And it took a while to sort things out. And I kept on thinking about what happened when I was in the coma, because it seemed so real. So I was having a hard time, just like a post-traumatic type of thing. I was having a hard time differentiating things and deciphering things. So it was a trip.
Wow, that was a trip. Will is now back home recovering. His muscles were so atrophied from his time in the coma that he needed to use a walker for about a week before he was strong enough to walk on his own. And while he's working his way back to a normal life, this episode has convinced him that his lifestyle had to change. He's eating right, exercising, and plans to leave his heavy drinking days in the past. And while Will is a new man physically, he's also discovered a spiritual side. Now, you're probably not going to see him in church on Sunday, but he now believes that there are powers greater than himself.
In the Chronicle interview I just did recently, I talk about a higher power. When I say that, I mean that all of my fans and friends, they all came together and prayed for me, and there was a collective positive force. That's the higher power I'm speaking of, because I never really believed in the power of prayer prior to this nightmare. But I do now, and it doesn't mean I'm following Jesus or any one religion or any one specific God of any sort. I just believe in the power of love and my friends, all their collective positive energy. That's what I meant when I said a higher power. I was overwhelmed when I came out of the coma, and after a few days, the nurse gave me my phone, and I turned it on, and it was just blowing up for an hour straight. It was crazy. And there's a lot of people I've never met before in the music world who I admire and who are idols of mine, reached out and sent messages of positivity, like JJ French from Twisted Sister. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. I have a Twisted Sister tattoo on my forearm. He reached out and sent me a personal message that meant a lot to me. And Rob Halford sent a message. I don't know Rob Halford either. And I have a Judas Priest tattoo on my other forearm. So it was very overwhelming.
And as I'm sure you can imagine, Will is eager to get back behind the drum kit.
I do have drum pads at home, and I've been practicing on those as much as I can. Like I put on a record and just play along to that and just, goof around on the drum pads. So I'm definitely staying active in that aspect, but I'm totally looking forward to getting my chops back down on a real kit. I jam with my brothers a lot. Well, one of them's a bass player and one of them's a guitarist, and we do 70s covers. We have a band called My Three Sons, and we do Kiss, Cheap Trick, Aerosmith, stuff like that. So that's how I'm going to ease back into it. I'm going to work my way up to playing the thrash stuff. And, Death Angel doesn't have anything coming up show-wise. So, but when we do start rehearsing again, by that point, I'll be back up to speed.
Throughout this conversation, the thing that really struck me, and it may have struck you too, is that Will was downright jovial. When he talked about the agonizing plane ride back from Europe, the days at home when he was struggling for each breath, his trip through hell, heaven, and Modesto, through all of that, he almost had a sense of humor about it all. I suppose when you're staring death in the face, making it through to the other side tends to give you an appreciation for what you've got.
I can't walk away from this any other way but positive, I can't blame anyone for anything, for getting the virus. I mean, who knows how I got it, like from a person I met on the road or whoever, we were playing shows every night. So I have no idea when or where or, any of that, how I got it. So I'm definitely walking away focusing on all the good things that I've acquired from this experience for sure.
Honestly, I envy Will's positivity. The coronavirus pandemic alone would have been enough to name 2020 as the worst year in a generation. But then in between the time Lou and Will recorded their interviews and the release of this podcast, we also witnessed the murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer and the unrest that followed, including our own government tear-gassing peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square. Guys, I want to remind you that we're not even halfway through this year. As soon as the 4th of July hits, we'll be diving headfirst into a presidential election. We all know that's going to be a bloodbath, and who knows what else the universe will throw at us. I think Lou was right when he said the real challenge of 2020 is going to be a mental health pandemic. One of the big slogans of the coronavirus outbreak was, "We're in this together." We need to expand that. We need to be in this together throughout everything that is going to happen this year. So please, if you're struggling, reach out to friends, family, or another support system for help. If you're feeling strong, please do something to make the world a better place. If we've ever needed a combination of Will's positive spirit and Lou's passion for helping others, it's this year. So to borrow another phrase from the first half of 2020, please stay safe, everyone. Thanks for listening to Sounds From Below. You can listen to more episodes at soundsfrombelow.com, but we really recommend subscribing in your favorite podcast app. When you do that, please do me a favor and leave us a rating and a review. It helps other people find us. And please, if you have one or two friends who you think would like this podcast, send them a link. Until next time, this is Jeremy Brisky from Lowboy Custom Beaters.